Buluvinaka, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues from Fiji and the Pacific, greetings from the Fiji Trade Commission North America office. My name is Alika Kupa and I'm Fiji's Trade Commissioner to the North American region based in San Francisco Bay Area. Welcome to the unpacking of the US FDA food labeling and ingredient regulation. What Pacific exporters must know before exporting. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, from my perspective, the US is an extremely large and consumer-driven market. It is estimated that in the United States, there's over 340 million people in total, and we have a large Pacific Island diaspora that are the first consumers of Pacific Island products. According to US Census Bureau data in 2020, it is estimated that there's about 1.2 million Pacific Island diaspora in the United States, and these numbers include Native Hawaiians. From the Trade Commission perspective and my perspective, ladies and gentlemen, understanding and meeting the US FDA labeling and regulatory requirements is important, and I believe that spreading awareness about this is very important. With this, I'd like to thank you for your time, and I'd like to thank the Registrar Corp team. I'd like to now hand over to Vijay Ananda, who's a Senior Regulatory Advisor for the Pacific. Naka.
Thanks very much, Alika. Welcome, everyone. We are really excited to have you join Registrar Corp for unpacking US FDA food labeling and ingredient regulation. What Pacific exporters must know before exporting. We'll be discussing the ingredient and labeling rules and regulations for food products distributed in the US, with a special focus on products typically sent from the Pacific region. I am proud to introduce Anna Benavente, Registrar Corp's Director of Product, Labeling and Ingredient Review, who will be leading this webinar. She holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Biology from the College of William and Mary and has over 15 years of experience in analytical research. Since joining Registrar Corp in 2009, her team has reviewed over 13,000 products for FDA compliance. Over to you, Anna.
Hi, good morning. I guess it is for you. It's evening over here, and I'm certainly happy to be able to join everyone. And thank you very much for that kind introduction. I'm very excited to be able to present to you all today. Note that you will get a recording of this webinar before or after we've completed within the next day or so. And also, I would like to encourage everyone, please, to ask whatever questions that you may have. You will see there's a Q&A box. It's the one with the little question mark up in the top right corner. You should see it. So please, as questions occur to you, go ahead and put them in there. We've saved time at the end to go ahead and answer any questions that you may have. Unfortunately, we can't monitor the chat or the hand raise features in the same way. So please do go ahead and use that Q&A box so that we can get to as many of them as we can in the time that we've allotted today. So now these are the topics that we're going to be covering during our webinar. So first, we're going to discuss what every food company must know before they start exporting food products into the US. So you've got FDA's oversight of foods, and then two really important questions that every company must ask related to their ingredients and their labels. We'll also discuss why you need to know and what sort of enforcement actions that FDA can take against companies in violation. Then in our next section, we'll describe how a company determines if their product's ingredients are acceptable for the US market. So we'll go over how FDA regulates food ingredients and how they designate them as safe, and common mistakes that are made by food companies before they ship. We'll also discuss the new ban on FD&C Red Number 3 and the status of kava in conventional foods. Then we'll follow up with the labeling requirements that all the food labels must meet. So all of the general mandatory labeling elements will be described, and we'll go over additional labeling considerations such as nutrient and organic claims, new guidance from FDA related to allergens, and the new requirement for a claim that a product is healthy. So we'll also go over some other considerations such as state level requirements and other federal agencies like the US Department of Agriculture. Then we'll also discuss a proposed rule that FDA has issued regarding front of package labeling. And then finally, we'll present to you Registrar Corp solutions to help your company achieve compliance and ensure trouble-free exportation to the US. Then we'll finish up, as I mentioned, with a question and answer period and try to get to as many of them as we can. So please use, again, that Q&A box, the one with the question mark and not the chat box, to add your questions at any time during the presentation. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with Registrar Corp, we are a firm that specializes in FDA regulatory compliance with over 30,000 clients across 175 countries. We have 20 offices worldwide to assist our clients in their time zones and languages. And we're very proud to have a high level of satisfaction from our customers and over 20 years of service to companies in the food, supplement, cosmetic, drug, and device industries. As mentioned before, our label review team has reviewed over 13,000 products for compliance, and these are experienced professionals that hold multiple advanced degrees in the areas of biology, chemistry, quality management, botany, pharmaceutical sciences, and cosmetic sciences. And so we take enormous pride in ensuring that our clients meet FDA's requirements. Now, as most people know, the U.S. food market is incredibly large, with revenues of almost $1 trillion projected in 2025. So for many companies, exportation to the U.S. is a significant way to increase their value and the financial growth of their businesses. So companies that successfully export to the U.S. can often count upon a consistent revenue stream in a market that continues to expand. However, there are many pitfalls that can occur between a company and its financial windfall in the U.S. FDA regulations are strict, so a company must ask itself before it exports, what do I need to know? So in the next section of this webinar, we'll describe how a company should ensure that its food products are appropriate for the U.S. market. Now, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, or FDA, has jurisdiction over most foods in the U.S. market. So then under their authority, they issue strict regulations regarding what ingredients can be used in food products. Then they also have complicated regulations that govern the labeling of food products. These regulations will specify, what must appear on the label, as well as rules regarding claims being made about the products. So many companies make the critical mistake of thinking FDA regulations only apply to domestic U.S. producers, but this is not the case. So imported foods must also comply with these regulations upon entry. FDA inspects foods in port, and it will not release products that have improper ingredients or labeling, even if the importer intends to change the label after it arrives. So products must be compliant when they arrive at the port of entry. Now, FDA has mandatory registration requirements that must be met first. So please do see us if you have any needs in this realm. We can absolutely assist you. And then after registration, smart companies will ask themselves two important questions before shipping their food product to the US. One, are my ingredients permitted? And two, is the labeling correct? These two issues are extremely common causes of problems for imported foods in US ports. Now, a company can ask itself certainly why this matters. Many companies ship for years without any issues. However, it is important to note that FDA does conduct inspections in port, particularly on goods from new shippers. If a non-compliant product is found, it is usually detained, and rarely will FDA let non-compliant goods in with only a warning. So if a product has an illegal ingredient, it is usually refused entry, since there's usually no way to remove it from the product. Products with labeling errors can be relabeled if the importer petitions FDA successfully. However, this process is expensive and time-consuming, as FDA must approve the petition and then inspect the goods after relabeling. This process can take months to resolve and can easily damage your business relationships. Also, a package with stickers covering non-compliant information is not very attractive to a consumer, and it could negatively impact your sales. Now, these violations can also result in a company being placed on what's called an import alert. Then all future shipments of the product will be detained without any inspection by FDA, and this can cripple your business in the US. So the consequences of noncompliance can be extremely severe. So for example, a few years ago, we existed a taro stuffing manufacturer who had been placed on an import alert for having illegal color additives in his product. Now the manufacturer had fixed that problem and then shipped with the intent to then prove to the FDA that the product was now admissible into the US. And so unfortunately, the FDA found that while the color additives were now acceptable, the labeling was in violation and kept it detained for that reason. So then the importer tried to petition with proposed labels, but they were not correct, and FDA denied the petition. So they were given one final chance to submit correct labeling, and they reached out to Registrar Corp to assist. So we came in, fixed the labels, drafted a second petition, and then communicated with FDA on the importer's behalf. Now, FDA approved the second petition that we had created, and then the products were successfully relabeled. But FDA took a few weeks to then make a decision and then also to come out and confirm that the products were now in compliance. So they were released, but not until 3 months after they were initially detained. And so proper labels upon entry would have prevented this fiasco. So I use this to really kind of try and illustrate how important it is to have everything in order before you actually ship into the US. So how does one go about actually figuring out whether or not the products are okay or whether you might be in danger of being detained? Now you have 2 basic steps to eliminate some of this risk. One is my formulation of okay. Conduct a check of your ingredients to make sure that they are permitted in the US. Then select only those products with formulations that will be acceptable to FDA. Then 2 is my labeling okay. For these selected products, review the labeling and revise as necessary before shipping. Remember, relabeling import is expensive and time-consuming if FDA even allows you to do it. So you want to prevent the need for relabeling by making sure it's correct before you export. Now, many companies are uncertain as to how to determine if their ingredients are acceptable for the US market. So in this section of the webinar, we'll explain how FDA regulates ingredients and where they publish their regulations and policies. FDA has 3 classifications for ingredients, generally speaking. You'll have food additives, substances that are generally recognized as safe, also called GRAS, and color additives. By law, all substances added to food must be approved by FDA through the Food Additive Petition process, unless they are generally recognized as safe. FDA also has established a list of prior sanction ingredients that are permitted in food. Now, GRAS substances are recognized as safe for their intended use by qualified experts, either through scientific procedures, such as clinical studies and things, or through a history of use in food. Now, color additives, even those from natural sources, must all be approved by FDA. They are never considered GRAS. So in order to figure out if your ingredients fall into one of these categories, you will need to research some specific resources. The U.S. Code of Federal Regulations includes all of the food additives and color additives that have been approved by FDA. It also includes regulations where FDA has affirmed certain substances are GRAS. It's important to pay close attention to these regulations as they will tell you exactly what products and intended uses are covered. So for example, some are permitted generally in food, but others may be limited to only particular types of food or for certain specific uses. Now, GRAS status is not limited to these FDA GRAS affirmations. GRAS status is based on the opinion of the scientific community as a whole. So companies are permitted to self-affirm that an ingredient is GRAS using data that is public or privately held. If a company chooses to self-affirm an ingredient as GRAS, then they should make sure that they have the data available in the event that FDA requests proof of their ingredient's status. We actually have seen this happen in court on a number of occasions. Now, FDA has a process by which a company may submit what is called a GRAS notice. to inform the FDA that they have determined an ingredient is GRAS. FDA may then respond whether they have any questions or concerns regarding the company's data and the conclusion that the substance is safe. Now, FDA's ingredient regulations are very specific regarding the exact nature of an ingredient and its intended use. For example, turmeric is affirmed as GRAS by FDA as a spice, and it's also specifically approved by FDA as a color additive for use in most foods. Now, by contrast, curcumin, which is a constituent of turmeric, does not automatically get classified the same way. It's not generally affirmed as GRAS by FDA. It's also not approved as a color additive and is a common reason for detention of foods that include it as a color. It is, however, the subject of GRAS notices filed by industry and accepted by FDA for use as a nutrient supplement in certain foods like yogurt. So if using curcumin, you would want to ensure that you could support that its intended use is covered by the GRAS notices or possess your own data regarding its GRAS status. And you should never use it as a color additive. So it is important to research your exact ingredient and its intended use to ensure that you do not violate FDA's food additive regulations. Now, unfortunately, many companies don't perform any sort of compliance check on their products prior to shipping, and then find out the hard way that their ingredients are not permitted in the US market. One of the most common mistakes are illegal colors, because FDA must approve every color additive, even those from natural, completely safe sources. Now, colors common in other markets, such as Ponceau 4R and Carmosine, are not permitted in the US. They just simply have never been approved, even though they're both perfectly safe. Other common color additive issues concern colors that are subject to what's called batch certification, a requirement from the FDA. For these colors, a sample from the actual batch must be sent to FDA for them to test it. So, for example, Allura Red must be certified by FDA as FD&C Red number 40. Brilliant Blue FCF is another example. It must be certified as FD&C Blue number 1. Other ingredients that we see that commonly cause issues are artificial sweeteners, such as cyclamates and dulcin, which are not approved by FDA and are on a specific list of prohibited ingredients. And then recently, FDA issued a final order that essentially bans partially hydrogenated oils due to their trans fat content. So products that are from other markets where they are permitted should not be sent to the US. Now, stevia has purity specifications that must be met. FDA has an import alert for it. Again, those are the ones that get detained without any physical examination whatsoever. For this, along with other ingredients such as tamarind, where FDA will stop these products and then force the importer to prove that they meet FDA's requirements before entering the US market. And then finally, CBD. CBD is really, really confusing because individual states in the US permit it, but at the federal level, it is not permitted to be added to food. And since a product that's being exported to the US is coming through a port, it is a federal officer that will be taking a look at it and not necessarily a state level official. So we strongly recommend against sending CBD into the US market. Now, keeping up with ingredient regulations and during a thorough check is extremely important, as regulations do change from time to time. So, for example, this year there was quite a firestorm as FDA banned FD&C Red number 3, a common color additive used in all sorts of products, including candy. So FDA is revoking the authorization and will enforce it beginning January 15th, 2027 for food products. So if you are using this color, you should start the reformulation process now to ensure that it is removed from all products destined for the US market. You will also want to ensure that your supply chain is vetted so that products containing this color do not accidentally get sent to the US. Another excellent example of why checking your ingredients is important lies with a popular herb called kava. It's often used in food products like relaxation drinks and teas due to its calming properties. However, it has been cited in warning letters, multiple warning letters from FDA, as not being approved for use in foods. And it's not affirmed as GRAS by FDA either. FDA also published a study that discusses the agency's concerns regarding its safety and stated that indiscriminate use results in it not being safe for human consumption. So therefore, it's very risky to send it to the US in a conventional food product. But its status in dietary supplements is a bit more vague, and it may be marketable in those sorts of products. So the dietary ingredients and supplements are actually regulated very differently than conventional food ingredients, which may need to be the topic of our next webinar, if you like. So dietary supplement regulation is very different from conventional foods. And so if you do have products that are being marketed as dietary supplements, certainly do reach out to us for any support that you might need. Now, once a company that has determined that their products are formulated correctly for the US market, it's still incredibly important that the labeling be reviewed to ensure that it's compliant. The labeling is the first thing that an FDA compliance officer will see when your product arrives in port. And so in this section of the webinar, we'll discuss the mandatory labeling requirements for food products. Now, there are certain statements that almost always must appear on food labeling. And so they're shown here, and we'll discuss them in depth in the next few slides. So first and foremost is the statement of identity, what the product actually is. FDA requires that it be the name specified by law, the common or usual name used in the marketplace, but not a brand name, or a fanciful name understood by the general public. Now, in certain cases, like with seafood and ginseng, FDA has established with the force of law how a product is named. Now, in most cases, for example, seafood species must use an approved market or common name found on the FDA's seafood list. Another example is ginseng, which must always be from the genus Panax, according to the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. Now, many products don't have names specified by law and instead rely on the use of a common or usual name. So, for example, many of us would be probably familiar with the brand Oreo and understand what that is, but that's not a statement of identity. Oreo labels include a statement of identity, chocolate sandwich cookies, to meet this requirement. Now, some products are subject to what is called a standard of identity. This is when FDA dictates what the characteristics are for a product identified by a particular name. So this can include the ingredients that are permitted or required, and also certain manufacturing methods that must be conducted. So examples would include articles like ice cream, jam, margarine, and peanut butter. And there are about 280 standards of identity, so you will want to determine if your product is subject to one. The statement of identity is also subject to special requirements based on flavor declarations, if there are juice ingredients, and when the product is in a specific form, and other requirements as well. The next mandatory statement we'll discuss is the net quantity of contents. You must declare the actual quantity of product in the container. Solid and viscous products are declared by weight and must include the term or abbreviation for net weight. Liquid products are to be declared in terms of volume. Importantly, you must include both metric and imperial terms of measurement. This is another common cause for detention. For example, a product that declares its weight in grams but does not include the amount in ounces. The next and usually most difficult part of mandatory food labeling is the nutrition facts label. FDA has very specific requirements for format, content, and type sizes. And unlike in some markets where nutrition labeling is simply based on 100 gram or 100 milliliter amounts, for FDA nutrition charts, a serving size must be declared based on the reference amount for that exact food that's been established by FDA. There are also additional dual column chart requirements for products that are in packages that might be consumed in a single sitting. There are also different formats for infant and toddler foods and when there's more than one product in a package. So we've pulled together some examples from other countries to illustrate how different the FDA chart is. So here you can see the US FDA chart compared to charts from the UK, Australia, and Mexico. Here you can see the US FDA chart compared to charts from Canada, Argentina, and China. Again, very different. So it's obvious to FDA inspectors when a product comes in with a label that's not in compliance with this requirement. So any inspector that sees this mistake is bound to detain the product and refuse it unless the importer petitions for permission to relabel it. Now, FDA has multiple chart formats that are permitted on food labeling, subject to certain conditions. So to the left here, we see the simplified format, which is permitted on certain products that don't have a lot of nutrient value, like, for example, sodas or salt, bottled water, things like that. Then on the upper right-hand side and in the middle of the panel, we see two tabular charts that are permitted on certain size packaging. The first one is permitted when the label panel is less than 3 inches tall, and the second one is permitted on certain smaller packages that can't fit the standard chart. And then at the bottom is the linear format that's permitted only on very small packaging. Now, if you choose to use any of these nutrition facts panels, you must make sure that your package and product qualify. So one of my first experiences at Registrar Corp was with a company that was detained for having the linear chart, that smallest one, on a package that was much too big. And they did not qualify to use it, and they were actually detained for that very reason. So important to double check this. The FDA's newest regulations for nutrition labeling include mandatory dual column formats for containers that are between 200 and 300% of an FDA reference amount for that food, and also in cases where the product is in a unit like a muffin that is between 200 and 300% of the reference amount. So in these cases, the chart must show the nutrient values for the serving size, but then also have a column for the entire container or the entire unit. And so the idea behind this is that it ensures that a consumer is aware of the nutrient values. So in case they eat the entire package or the entire unit, they're aware of, the calories and fat and the negative nutrients really, that they might be consuming if they do that. Now, most foods, except for single ingredient foods, must declare all of their ingredients on the package. Now, most of these ingredients must be declared by their common or usual name. So no E or INS numbers are allowed. Now, most have to be declared individually and not grouped together in parentheses. They have to be in descending order by weight. And there are some exceptions, though, for the rules. For certain ingredients, like flavors, may be declared as natural or artificial flavor. Colors, some colors don't have to be declared by name. And then also spices often can be grouped together in a single declaration of spices. Now, allergens are a very important part of food labeling and a very common cause for product recalls and other similar issues. So accurate allergen declarations are a significant safety and labeling issue. And the FDA has 9 mandatory allergens that require disclosure: milk, eggs, fish, crustacean shellfish, tree nuts, peanuts, wheat, soybeans, and sesame. Now, you may declare them in parentheses next to the ingredient in the list, or you can declare them all in a contained statement adjacent to the list. Now, FDA recently issued a new guidance document related to allergen labeling that some of you may have heard about. And it made some dramatic changes to our understanding of what FDA expects companies to declare to meet the requirements of the Food Allergen and Consumer Protection Act. So some of these differences have really sent shockwaves through the industry, most notably the removal of coconut from the list of tree allergens, along with beech nut, butternut, chestnut, chinkapin, ginkgo, hickory nut, lychee nut, pili nut, and shea nut. It was really funny. They kind of just sort of snuck it in randomly in one of the Q&A sections of this guidance document. It wasn't even a grand announcement. We just sort of found it as we were reading the guidance. And so that's pretty groundbreaking, really, to remove coconut because it's so prevalent in the marketplace. Then FDA also provided clarification in this guidance regarding milk from sources other than cows. So we've always known that when the term milk was used just by itself, that FDA expected it to be milk from a cow, and that milk from other sources should be declared in the ingredients list with that source, such as goat milk or sheep's milk. So FDA took this a step further to make it clear that allergen labeling for milk does include milk from other sources, and those sources should also be named in the contained statement or when it's included parenthetically adjacent to a milk product such as whey in the ingredients list. So then FDA also made the same statements about the declaration for eggs as well. So if it's not derived from a chicken, you must include the source, such as a duck egg, when you're either listing it in the ingredients list or if you're listing it in the contained statement for the purposes of allergen labeling. Now, every food product label needs to declare either the manufacturer, packer, or distributor. Now, you can choose any of these three options to meet the requirement. You should note, though, that it needs to include the actual corporate name for that entity and the full address, although you may omit the street address if it is found in a local directory. So FDA needs to have a way to contact a responsible party if they discover a problem with the product, but you have a lot of flexibility. Any one of those three will meet the requirement. Now, while it's not an FDA requirement, it is important to know that U.S. Customs and Border Protection has a labeling requirement for the country of origin. So by their definition, this is the country where the last substantial transformation took place, and it must appear on all retail food labels. Also, please know that you can only use abbreviations for countries that have been deemed acceptable by customs. So for example, per a ruling by U.S. Customs, Malay is not an acceptable abbreviation for Malaysia, as a U.S. consumer may not be familiar with it and would not realize that it stands for Malaysia. Now, recently, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, or USDA, issued new rules regarding the disclosure of bioengineered or GMO ingredients. USDA maintains a list of foods that are generally considered to be genetically modified, such as corn and soy. So if your food product has an ingredient on that list, you must disclose it unless you have definitive proof that your ingredient is not bioengineered. Also, if you know that any ingredient in your food that is not on that list, but is the product of bioengineering, then you must disclose it on the label as well. Now, USDA does give several different options, including texts or a symbol that can be used to meet the requirement. And even though this rule was issued by USDA, it impacts FDA-regulated product labeling as well. In fact, the irony is that it actually impacts FDA-regulated foods more than USDA-regulated foods. So just due to some nuances within the rules. So know that you have to apply this requirement to your packaging as well. Now, in addition to these regulations regarding the mandatory statements that have to appear, FDA has a maze of regulations related to these other labeling issues such as claims. FDA dictates when such claims can be made. So for example, nutrient content claims refer to levels of a nutrient in a food, such as high in fiber, low fat, and healthy. FDA sets nutrient levels that must be met in order for a label to bear that claim. Health claims refer to a risk reduction in disease that may occur due to the consumption of a food. A health claim is actually the only time that you can legally reference a disease, for the most part, on a food label, and therefore it must be pre-approved by FDA. FDA approves them and actually puts them into regulation. Now, structure function claims are claims that reference effects to the structure or function of the body due to the consumption of the food. So these claims are not pre-approved by FDA, but they must be truthful and based on the nutritive value of the food. So an example of this might be calcium builds strong bones, relaying the role of the nutrient in the effect on the structure or function of the body. Now, another common labeling element would be additional languages added to the label. This is very common because, of course, there are many people in the United States that speak languages other than English as their primary language. But definitely note that your labels must have all the mandatory statements in English. If any other language is present, then all mandatory statements must appear in that language too. Now, brand names and mottos may be exempt from this requirement, though, because they don't convey material information about the product. So the idea behind it is that you may have a US consumer who actually does not speak English, who sees the language on the label. Because of this, FDA wants them to have access to all of the information that the agency deems mandatory. So in essence, you're going to have to completely translate all of the mandatory information into that second language. Now, due to a strong marketing advantage and consumer desire for clean labels, organic foods are now a significant part of the US market. So in order to make this claim, though, your food will need to be certified by an agent who is accredited by the USDA's National Organic Program. The claim itself will be based on the percentage of organic ingredients in the product, and that usually the agent's information also has to appear on the label. Now, there are other instances where you must consider other agencies' jurisdiction over your products too. So, for example, in addition to regulating the organic claim, USDA also has complete jurisdiction over any fish in the order siluriformes, or catfish. This is a very random little carve-out where catfish were placed under USDA regulation and inspection instead of FDA. In essence, all other forms of seafood fall under FDA except for catfish. USDA, may also implement requirements if your products are fresh or frozen fruits or vegetables, or on roots such as ginger. There may be some requirements upon entry that the importer will need to make sure are met. And so USDA may also require that your importers obtain special VS permits. They're called veterinary services permits for products with small amounts of meat or poultry. Also, if you have products that are animal sourced ingredients like milk or eggs, like yogurt, USDA may also require your importers to obtain the permits too, even though these products are officially under FDA jurisdiction. Again, this is actually a requirement on the importer. You will not need to get these permits, but your importer may. And so I raise it so that you may be prepared. They may have questions for you about, heat treatment of the ingredients, or whether they were sourced in areas where there's foot and mouth disease on the animals or something like that. So just be prepared if you have those types of ingredients in your product, that your importer may need some supplemental information from you about the manufacturing and the nature of the ingredients. Now, certain states also may have additional requirements, such as bottled water. So if you are sending plain bottled water, not water-based beverages, but just plain bottled water into the US, check with the individual states where it will be distributed to see if there are any registration requirements. Some states have none. For example, Florida and Texas have very few requirements. Some states, though, such as California, may have extensive requirements that must be met. And then on one last note, if you are interested in bringing in alcoholic beverages, most of these are regulated primarily by the TTB, the Alcohol Tax and Tobacco Trade Bureau. And so they are subject to different special provisions and labeling requirements from the ones that we're discussing today. Now, in December of 2024, FDA issued a new rule that drastically changes the requirements to call a food healthy on the labeling. So companies will have until February 25th, 2028 to update their labeling to incorporate this new regulation. The previous regulation focused on individual nutrients and required certain low levels of fat, saturated fat, cholesterol, and sodium, as well as mandating that the product contain at least 10% of the daily value of a nutrient from a specific list, such as calcium, iron, and dietary fiber. Now, this old rule was issued in the 1990s, and there have been some modifications over the last, few years, but it still reflected outdated thinking about nutrition and the kind of nutrient values that the body needs. So the new regulation incorporates a better understanding of human nutrition and focuses on foods as a whole and the need for healthy dietary patterns, and shifts the focus away from levels of individual nutrients. So the new regulation actually doesn't mention nutrient levels at all. It's focused entirely on food groups. And so a food will qualify if it contains as its only ingredients other than water, vegetables, fruit, whole grains, fat-free or low-fat dairy, lean meat, seafood, eggs, beans, peas, lentils, nuts, or seeds. Now, many of these would not have qualified under the old rule, even though we now recognize the importance of healthy fats, for example, in the diet, such as what is found in seafood like salmon and then nuts. The new regulation establishes what it calls food group equivalents, and they're based on these food categories plus soy. So for example, for vegetables, a food group equivalent is a half a cup of an equivalent vegetable. And then a food with multiple ingredients can qualify for healthy if it meets certain conditions and certain amounts of these food group equivalents. Also, certain oils like olive oil that are low in saturated fat may meet the requirement to claim healthy, which they could not do under the old rules. The same is true for water, tea, and coffee, which it was amazing to think that bottled water could not make the healthy claim under the old rules because they didn't have any nutrients on FDA's list. Now, these can be labeled as healthy if they have less than 5 calories per serving and per reference amount established by FDA. Now, the challenging part, though, is that the regulation does not provide a way to easily determine what's meant by these food group equivalents. So, for example, a dried vegetable powder added to food, but how would you calculate what that food group equivalent is? So FDA has stated, though, that they intend to issue guidance soon to help industry make these calculations. Now, again, if you have whole vegetables and fruits and single ingredient products that I've mentioned, you can go ahead and stick that claim on there right now as you're shipping. So if you've got anything that meets those qualifications, then you're good to go ahead and start making that claim. Now, the agency actually is also conducting consumer research on a healthy symbol that may be applied to packaging so that a consumer can quickly determine if a food meets the requirement. Now, front of package labeling has been present in the marketplace for quite a few years, and it's been entirely voluntary in the US up to this point. And there are many ways that it's added to food labels. So there are some systems that have used symbols to characterize the overall nutrient value of a food, others that have focused on individual nutrient levels. And here we see a few examples. So, such as some of the front of package labeling that you can find on cereals made by General Mills, the guiding stars symbol that's used by some US retailers, and then the sensible solution mark that's used by Kraft. And so up until now, FDA has only objected if the agencies determined that the front of package statements were false or misleading, or if they were in violation of the regulations that govern the nutrient content claims. So, however, though, in its mission to help consumers make healthier food choices, FDA has now issued a proposed rule to require front of package labeling on most food products. So FDA's proposed rule will require a nutrition info box that lists the percent daily values of saturated fat, sodium, added sugars, and then characterizes them as low, medium, or high. Sorry. Now, this will be required for most foods intended for people aged 4 years and older. So it's not going to be required for toddler or infant foods. There will also be a voluntary declaration of calories that can be made adjacent to the box. Then FDA will have special labeling provisions for certain packages, such as small packages, packages that maybe declare as packaged as well as prepared in the nutrition facts label, like you might see on a cake mix or something like that. and then also aggregate packages that have more than one product listed in the nutrition facts label. Now, right now, this is a proposed rule. So the public can send comments to FDA up until May 16th of 2025. Now, please note that this is only proposed. It is not final, and it could change, and it could change dramatically, which is what we saw happen with the change to the nutrition facts label in 2016. The final version was very different from what they proposed in 2014, so do not add this to your labels yet. Now here we see some examples of the proposed front of package boxes. So at the top left is the standard box with the small package box on the bottom left. The voluntary declaration of calories is shown in the other two examples from FDA. Now these boxes will have to be placed in the upper third of the principal display panel, which is the panel that faces the consumer at purchase. And then the levels are defined as follows. Low would be less than or equal to 5% of the recommended daily value. Medium would be 6 to 19%, and high would be greater than or equal to 20% of the daily value. So companies need to be vigilant in ensuring that their labels meet FDA's requirements. So here are 5 really common mistakes, many of which I actually recently found on a detention notice for a company that did not do a compliance check before shipping. They have 5 different sauce products sitting in port, and many with these labeling violations that we're talking about today. So for example, it's very common for in other markets to permit using the E or the INS numbers, but that's not the case here. And we often see companies using nutrition charts that are only permitted on small packages, not understanding the limitations of their use. And because the majority of the world relies on the metric system, many labels arrive to the US without the mandatory declaration in ounces or fluid ounces. And it's very common for labels to bear claims such as high in vitamin A or rich in potassium, but the product doesn't have enough to qualify to make these claims. And then last but not least, if there's any non-English statement on your label, unless it's a brand name or a motto, you will probably need to reproduce all of the mandatory statements in that language. Now, we hope that this information that we've presented gives you a good overview of how to check your product's formulation and labeling to determine if it will meet FDA's requirements. Now, if you still find that the rules and regulations are too confusing or want an expert to look over your products before you ship, Registrar Corp is here to help. So Registrar Corp has many solutions to help you make sure that your labels and products meet FDA's requirements. We offer varying levels of assistance with our full label compliance service, label check report, nutrition facts, AlaCalc nutrition labeling and recipe management software, and the ingredient review services. We also offer consulting by the hour if you have any other questions or concerns that require an experienced regulatory affairs professional. Now, as I mentioned before, it's critical to make sure your formulation consists only of ingredients that are permitted in the US market, as well as making sure that the labeling is correct. Our full label compliance service gives you one-on-one assistance with an experienced regulatory specialist who will do a complete evaluation of your ingredients and labeling. We conduct a thorough analysis of the label for each of the mandatory statements we've discussed today, and we make recommendations for changes to bring your label and product into compliance. We issue a report that includes all of our recommendations, and we will provide you with a print-ready graphic that is in compliance with FDA labeling requirements. This would have been created at our direction by professional graphic designers who have been working for a decade or more on FDA-compliant labels. The service also includes a 30-day period where you can ask questions and an extra round of graphic changes to the revised label at no additional charge. Now, Registrar Corp takes compliance very seriously. We put hours and hours of research into our labeling services and stand by our work. So this is our promise to our clients. Any client that uses our label comply service can count on our continued support as long as they use our revised label. If FDA questions the compliance of any label we produce, Registrar Corp will intervene at no cost to you. We will communicate with FDA on your behalf and explain how the labeling regulations were applied to your product label. This usually involves submitting what's called testimony of admissibility, and it includes all of the regulatory citations that we use to develop your compliant label. We have found actually that sometimes FDA officers may mistakenly stop products that are actually in compliance. So in such cases, Registrar Corp intervenes to secure release of your product. We will do this for as long as you use our label, no expiration date. This will happen a few times a year. FDA officers are smart and professional, but they are not always labeling specialists. So please let Registrar Corp be your partner in ensuring that you have trouble-free exportation to the US. Now, if you are feeling pretty confident that your label's compliant, but you still want the reassurance of a group of experienced regulatory professionals taking a look it over, Registrar Corp offers our label check report option. Our team will look over the 10 mandatory elements that should appear on your conventional food label and give you guidance regarding the potential issues that we find and instructions on what changes you should make prior to exporting it to the US. A report will summarize the changes, and you will receive 30 minutes of consultation after delivery to go over our findings. Now, if you're feeling pretty confident about your labeling, but you do want some help specifically with that complicated nutrition facts label, Registrar Corp offers a service that will give you one-on-one assistance from a regulatory specialist who will help you figure out the proper reference amount and serving size for your product, as well as the proper modified label format that may be permitted for your product and your package. We'll provide you with the print-ready graphic of the nutrition facts label and a report that details each recommendation and regulation that was used to develop it. Registrar Corp also offers a do-it-yourself solution for companies that produce their nutrition labeling for the US and other markets. Our a la carte nutrition labeling and recipe management software allows you to easily enter a single recipe and create nutrition charts for the US, UK, Canada, Mexico, and the EU. A la carte has nutrient information for thousands of ingredients from 9 verified databases. The system allows for unlimited recipes with easy ways to organize and monitor your offerings, manage costings, and optimize recipes to reach certain nutrient goals, such as low fat or low sodium. It's an online platform, subscription-based service, and perfect for manufacturers, caterers, food service organizations, and any other business that requires accurate nutrient information for its food products. For companies that are still in the process of developing their formulations or that are concerned that their ingredients may not be approved in the US, Registrar Corp's ingredient review service can provide peace of mind prior to export. We will review all of the ingredients in your products to verify that they are affirmed as safe, approved as food additives, or approved as color additives by FDA. So you can save yourself the heartache and headache of a review shipment by ensuring that your ingredients are permitted before you export. And then if you have needs that don't fit neatly into one of our defined services, Registrar Corp offers customized consulting with our subject matter experts to help you solve your most complex product challenges. So from a single-hour consult to long-term regulatory support, we can tailor our assistance to help you and your firm to achieve compliance and minimize your risk of enforcement from FDA. Now, we're not just limited to the US FDA. We have a global reach, and if you are sending products into the Canadian and Mexican markets, we can assist you with the labeling for these countries as well. We offer label comply and label check for Canada, and we also offer label comply and the Constancia approval for Mexico. So if you export to these markets and need some assistance, please do reach out to us so that we can help. Now, if you're unsure whether or not you need help and whether or not your labels are compliant, we can help here too. You can actually send your product labels to us for a free label assessment. We will check to see if they appear to have any compliance issues related to these mandatory requirements that we've discussed today. And so we can give you information about whether or not we've spotted any errors in the 10 major mandatory labeling elements that FDA requires. And then we also have many other ways at Registrar Corp that we can help you export your foods to the US. We have a full range of compliance services, all of which are fixed fee, so you know going in what the cost will be. We can assist you with many of the FDA requirements, such as the food facility registration and US agent requirement, prior notice, which is done immediately before shipping, low acid and canned food requirements, food safety plans, and then services to meet the requirements of the Foreign Supplier Verification Program. Now, we can also help if your products are being detained or on import alert. If you get detained, don't give up right away. Send us FDA's notice of detention for a free assessment, and we can see if and how you may be able to get these products released. As I mentioned, sometimes FDA officers make mistakes, or maybe it's a simple labeling error that you can get fixed in port. So definitely reach out to us if you find that a product is being detained to see if we can assist. And so we do look forward to assisting you and being your partner as you embark on your successful exportation of products to the US. So then we also have a special discount for you to thank you for attending the webinar today. And you can get $200 off the full label comply service or $100 off the label check between now and the end of April. So simply mention it to your regulatory advisor when you're contacting us and the discount will be applied. So thank you so much for your time and attention. We really, really appreciate it. Thank you very much, Alika, for allowing us to present. Looking forward to partnering with you as you ship to the US. And thank you very much for your time and attention. Truly do appreciate it. And I hope that you found it helpful. So with that, we can go ahead and open up our webinar for any questions that you may have. Happy to extend past the end of the hour if people have questions. I'm happy to hang out as long as necessary to see to it. So please do feel free to add them to the Q&A box that you see at the top of your screen. And so with no further ado, I can go ahead. First question would be, can we get a copy of the presentation? So we are able to send out a link to the recording. I would also like to make mention of the fact that we actually have a 24-hour chat line on our website. So any time of day, you can contact and get in touch with a specialist with Registrar Corp so that if you have questions about the rules that govern exportation of food products to the US, just reach out to us. 24-hour helpline available to you. Okay, next question. If Registrar Corp is to review the label, how long will it take for us to do it? So for the full label comply service, where we will revise the label and check all of your ingredients, full formulation and labeling, that typically will take 15 to 20 business days for a label. If we are doing the label check, where we are simply identifying the compliance issues and then giving you pointed comments on the changes you need to make, as well as giving you links to resources to help you make those changes, those typically will take 5 to 7 business days. Okay, let's see what our next question about dietary supplements on kava packets. Okay, so I think the question is about whether or not if a kava is labeled as a conventional food instead of a dietary supplement. So this, again, kind of going back to that very, very uncertain status that kava has. We have seen warning letters issued from FDA where they have questioned the safety of it in conventional foods. However, dietary supplements are regulated under a different set of rules. So it may be possible, and for now, dietary supplement seems to be the most prudent path to take if you have a kava product, just because of the nature of it and the fact that FDA has said that they don't believe that it's appropriate for conventional food products. Again, do reach out to us if you have additional questions about kava and its status in either one of those categories. Okay. Let's see, with the label review, do we get the artworks corrected if submitted for the label review? Okay, yes, for our full label comply service, in essence, you send us a copy of the label. Best is Adobe Illustrator or Photoshop, an editable graphic form where we can access the text in the different layers. And then our graphic design team at our direction will make the changes necessary to ensure that it's compliant with all of the formatting and placement requirements. We have them implement all of our recommendations as far as the serving sizes and the format of the nutrition label and how the ingredients are declared and that net quantity, all of those mandatory labeling statements that we've been talking about today. And so all of this will be implemented onto the label, and then we send it back to you, and then you have 30 days to request a round of changes if you like, or if you want to make the change and then resubmit it to us to get our comments, we can do that too. Okay, let's see. Okay, next question is, my product is cold processed goat milk soap from Fiji. Is that considered a cosmetic or just a normal product? So very good question. So we do cosmetic and drug label reviews as well, actually. So if you have those types of products, also please do feel free to reach out to Registrar Corp. So soap is usually a cosmetic. There is a very odd sort of exemption for a certain type of soap that is, I'm going to botch the actual definition of it, but alkali based without any sort of cosmetic function to it, just simple cleaning. Most soaps will have moisturizing properties, fragrance, are intended to help you smell good, that sort of thing, soften the skin. Those types of intended uses will cause a product to be regulated as a cosmetic. And so if that's the type of product that you have, even if you're calling it soap, it likely is going to be regulated as a cosmetic, and so it will need to comply with the labeling requirements for cosmetics, and then also potentially with the registration and listing requirements that cosmetics have now, thanks to the Modernization of Cosmetic Regulation Act of 2022, which just got passed a few years ago and is now in force. So if you have cosmetics, y'all please do reach out. We can answer lots of questions about cosmetics for you as well. Okay, let's see. A question about on the labels, labeling it as pipermethysticum powder. So FDA usually requires that common names be used. So even if you include the scientific name for a botanical, such as kava or turmeric or any botanical type of ingredient, do make sure that you're including the common name for it as well, like kava or turmeric or whatever the case may be, so that you can meet the ingredient labeling requirements for that as well. Okay, let's see. On to the next questions. Do we offer HACCP classes? So yes, we actually have an entire division that has online training courses. Many of them are you just go at your own pace. Many of them are accredited by certain organizations. The name escapes me right now, but they have been verified by organizations that exist to accredit online training courses in food safety. We have them for food safety and labeling and cosmetic GMPs and all sorts of different topics. So if you have a need for learning HACCP or HARP-C, for like the non-seafood and non-juice products, check out our online training courses. They are affordable, often subscription-based, and can help you make sure that your food safety teams are meeting the FDA's requirements. Let's see. Okay. Let's see, will the presentation be made available as well? Unfortunately, we can't send out the actual slides themselves per se, but you will have access to the recording in a link, and we'll be following up. If you have any questions that you come up with after our presentation, please do feel free to reach out as well. Let's see, our next question. What is the best resource available for importing kava as a dietary supplement? So for kava as a dietary supplement, it's important to do some research on whether or not kava is considered a new dietary ingredient or whether it's considered an old dietary ingredient. We have information on our website about dietary supplements that you're welcome to go and access and reach out to us. And just to, it may be very specific to the level of kava in your product and the type of product that the kava is in, but do feel free to reach out to us to see if we can serve as a resource to you. Okay. Next one is, I want to supply ingredients to the US where the finished product manufacturing will happen. So does labeling apply to this type of product? So when it comes to bulk products, like bulk ingredients that are being sent into the US for further manufacture, you absolutely do not have to worry about the nutrition labeling part of this. We generally, though, will recommend that the other labeling requirements be met. FDA's regulations are a little vague on in terms of what other exemptions bulk and wholesale products might have. They absolutely do not allow for unlabeled products to enter except under very strict conditions, in essence, if you're sending it to yourself or a subsidiary of your company. So if you are sending a bulk wholesale ingredient, we recommend include all of these except for the nutrition facts label. You won't need to have that. Okay, let's see. Our next question. Okay, question is about PCQI, which is Preventive Controls Qualified Individual. So the online training courses that we have, I do believe we have courses for becoming a PCQI. Also, if your company does not have anybody in-house that can serve this function, we have an entire food safety division that does this type of work. And so if you need somebody to serve as a PCQI, reach out to us because we may be able to assist you. Let's see. Okay, I sell art design bark cloths from Fiji. Do we also need to consult with Registrar Corp? So most likely no, I would say, unless these bark cloths are going to come in contact with food, in which case they would be considered a food contact substance. And so there may be some requirements if you're using certain inks or coatings or other sorts of substances on the cloth, if it's going to come in contact with food. If it's not, if they are, washcloths or clothing or textiles or things like that, then it is very likely that they would not be FDA regulated and you wouldn't have to worry about it. Okay, we'll try and get in a few more. Let's see. Okay, sending raw materials, virgin coconut oil to be packed out here. Do I still need labels? Yes, you still do want to label. As I just mentioned, we recommend everything except for the nutrition facts, which is the only one that has a very specific exemption written into regulation that wholesale type products or products for further manufacture absolutely do not have to have the nutrition labeling. For the rest, it's kind of vague. And so rather than risk, an officer in port questioning whether or not your label is in compliance, just put all that information on there, and then that way you won't have to worry about it and risk any delays as you're shipping. Okay. Let's see, for question about label requirements for different packaging types, such as frozen vacuum products, are there any requirements? So the labeling regulations themselves don't necessarily specify, other than saying if you have a product that's in a form like fresh or frozen, that should be part of that statement of identity. However, we strongly recommend and FDA will expect any necessary instructions to ensure safe use of the product or safe storage of the product should be included on the packaging. If you're ever in doubt, best thing to do is just to add it, just to make sure that a consumer can safely buy, store, and then consume the product. Okay, so next question. My product is fried in soybean oil and contains peanuts. In terms of GMO labeling, do I need to specifically disclose this soy in particular? Okay, so you will probably have to go ahead and include the bioengineered ingredient, either a text that says it has a bioengineered ingredient or the symbol that USDA has created. There are certain oils, if they're highly refined and there are no allergenic substances present, then you may be exempted from that, the there's not allergenic. I'm confusing my requirements. If there are no bioengineered elements remaining in the oil because it's so highly refined. The same applies to allergens, but if there are no bioengineered elements remaining. But the thing is that you have to maintain data in order to support that in case the USDA or FDA start asking. So my recommendation would be is if you don't have that kind of data, and if you're already having to include it for another GMO ingredient, to just go ahead and keep it there. And then that way you don't have to worry about it. Okay, let's see. We'll try and get in just another few. Okay, question about seafood such as fish or crabs need to be shrink wrapped or vacuum packed. So the labeling requirements don't really mention this about packaging. This may fall under the food safety side of things. So if you have questions about that, we certainly see them vacuum packed, we see them, frozen. But there are also, I know, just from being at Registrar Corp for 15 years, as long as I've been there, that certain processes like vacuum packed and that sort of thing can sometimes have other ramifications like in histamine production and other things. So if you have questions about packaging for seafood especially, and reach out to us, again, we have an entire food safety division that can probably assist you with this matter. Okay, and try and get at least one or two more before we wrap up. Okay, so does honey qualify to being organic, and does Registrar Corp facilitate that? So honey, of course, can be organic, but the organic claim is actually regulated by USDA, and it requires usually that a USDA accredited organic certifying agent, so think like EcoCert is one that always pops into mind for me, you need to have the product certified. Now there are certain countries that have understanding and agreements with the US, I know the EU does, and I believe Canada does too, where if it's certified organic in the home country, then it's certified organic over here without any extra steps you really have to take in terms of getting it certified. But yeah, depending on what your country is. If you have that question, reach out to us and we can try and answer that for you. But generally speaking, you're going to need to get it certified by a USDA accredited agent. So EcoCert, again, the first one that kind of pops into mind. Okay, and we'll do one more before we wrap up. So question is from Fiji, if we want to send turmeric, what category do we go under? So turmeric is a really interesting example. So it will depend on how it's packaged, what the intended use is, how you've labeled it. So if you've labeled it turmeric and okay, I'm going to think about my kitchen right now. So in my spice cabinet, I have turmeric and it is labeled as just a spice, plain label. It actually is exempted from the nutrition facts chart because it doesn't have any of the elements that go in a nutrition facts chart. It's just sitting up in my spice cabinet, happy as can be. I use it all the time. I love curry. Then though, on another part of my kitchen, I have a turmeric dietary supplement because turmeric is very good for inflammation. I have inflation on the brain these days. Inflammation, getting older, the joints are hurting a little bit. So I'm taking turmeric in a dietary supplement. This is labeled as a dietary supplement with a supplement facts label. It has claims on it like helps support joint health, helps with inflammation. And I'm taking it as a dietary supplement. That's the intended use. So the labeling is totally different. Then if you are actually sending it as, maybe to another manufacturer as a color additive, it's approved as a color. So then you would have a label that identifies it as a color additive, and you'd be sending it off to, Kraft or Nabisco or whomever you're selling it to as a color additive. So it all really kind of boils down to the intended use of that product. So I hope that's helpful. I hope I didn't just make things more confusing, but that's, again, part of that intended use of the product dictates kind of what its classification is and what sort of labeling it's gonna need. Okay. So with that, I'm afraid we're going to have to go ahead and wrap up. I want to thank again everybody for hanging out with me, a little bit past our time. I hope you found the information to be helpful. And so I hope you have a great rest of your day. Please do consider Registrar Corp to be, your resource. We are here to help. We really enjoy what we do. We've been at it for 20 years. I've been at it for 15. We live for this. Reach out to us. Let us know what we can do. If you have any ideas for other, helpful webinars, whether, kind of a general how to export to the US webinar, if you have interest in cosmetics or dietary supplements, reach out to VJ, let us know. We're always happy to make presentations to help industry with compliance. So thank you all very, very much, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.